Welcome to the Smarter E podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Smarter E podcast. My name is Zach and I'm your host for the English-speaking version. So obviously we can't talk about energy transition or the new energy world without talking about energy storage. And when you talk about energy storage, mostly you are actually talking about lithium-ion batteries, as these are one of the most important forms of energy storage at the moment. So with this episode, we want to specifically focus on the bankability of energy storage, also on the market predictions for the coming months, but also on the long run for the next years, and the three most important drivers behind the market for energy storage. Before we start, I quickly would like to thank a partner who supports us and with whom we work together successfully. Today, it's LG Chem, the market leader in battery technology. Not only does LG Chem provide cells to most car makers, the company is also providing the most compact home storage solution, ReSo, which is already installed in more than 45,000 European homes. Providing me with answers and insights in this episode will be Florian Mayr of Apricum. Apricum is the clean tech advisory with global offices all around the world, and Florian there heads the practice for, on the one hand, green mobility and on the other hand, energy storage. So Florian, obviously while we chat, we do a remote interview, so that means you're still working in your home office, which you as a consultant or as a moderator can easily do. But when it comes to storage production, I assume a lot of the stakeholders in the industry are just now restarting their factories, depending on where they are in the world. So what kind of world are the stakeholders of the energy storage industry returning back to now after the COVID-19 crisis?
I think to answer this question, it's important to understand to what extent the battery industry was impacted by the COVID-19 crisis so far. I mean, it's important to distinguish between short-term impacts and longer-term impacts. Of course, there are short-term impacts of the pandemic on energy storage due to the general economic slowdown, site access problems, difficulties to get permissions in times of lockdowns, etc. But this will certainly lead to a decline of activity in 2020. But however, I have not heard of any large-scale project under construction that have been cancelled or delayed for a longer period. So that's good news. So to the opposite, if you look at the news, there are some of the largest grid battery contracts and being announced over the last few months, like, for example, in the US, Southern California Edison 770 megawatt storage procurement in May, which was in fact the largest ever seen. And this is because grid battery projects have multi-year development cycles. So a temporary slowdown in construction or business development is really unlikely to kill a project. So major projects moving forward with utility contracts also qualifying as critical infrastructure. I think that's an important point, which is typically allowed to proceed as long as you have appropriate safety measures in place, even in times of a pandemic. And also, I haven't seen any energy storage business bankruptcies as a casualty of COVID-19 yet, as far as I can tell at least. And so it seems that market analysts are right when seeing the impact mostly on the behind-the-meter side of storage, where C&I customers might have to cut back on investments outside of their core business. And many homeowners, in the case of residential storage, might defer their household spending to 2021 and beyond. So overall, there will be a drop in installation in 2020 compared to forecasts. But in general, we expect still a significant year-on-year growth on the total storage markets. But that's a short-term impact.
In another episode, we already had a look of COVID-19 and the impact of it on the whole new energy world, renewable energies. So there, the bottom line was rather positive, specifically in Europe, for example. You have the Next Gen Recovery Package that is clearly in line with the European Green Deal. So apart from Europe, but also worldwide, is that rather than a big opportunity for energy storage?
Yes, I definitely think so. Also, I haven't seen energy storage being specifically mentioned in the economic stimulus packages so far. What is mentioned all of the time is renewable energy and also e-mobility. And if we look at the drivers of the energy storage market, one is certainly that there needs to be demand for services that energy storage can provide. And on a very high level, energy storage is always provided some kind of flexibility. And this is very often triggered by the integration of variable renewable energy. And likewise, energy storage in the short term, renewable energy market is, of course, impacted by COVID-19 and to a certain extent, even more severe than energy storage, because here analysts are expecting rather a stagnating market at best. Even a short decline compared to 2019 could be the case. As in comparison to energy storage, as I mentioned earlier, there's still a certain growth expected year on year. And renewable energy in general is the fundamental drivers are still in place, right? So there's still, on top of these governmental stimulus programs, there is still a need for cheaper and cheaper renewable energy also to meet decarbonization targets that are becoming more and more common around the world.
Before we dive into specifically demand as a driver a little bit more in detail, what other drivers are relevant when it comes to energy storage?
As I said, there needs to be demand for services that energy storage could provide, but it's always important to note that there are also other solutions, so non-storage solutions that could actually address the same kind of demand. So I would say the second driver is that energy storage is more competitive to these non-storage solutions. And as a third driver, you need to have the right regulatory and market frameworks in place which are suitable for energy storage. Because again, even if energy storage is the most competitive solution, it doesn't help if energy storage cannot access a market or there are no ways to let an energy storage provider monetize the value that energy storage could provide.
So when talking about demand, the first driver that you mentioned, of course, renewable energies are a big driver, and for stationary storage as well as for mobile storage. And specifically talking about the later one, how big is the role of e-mobility?
I think independent of COVID-19, we are witnessing an increasing convergence of the transport and power sectors. And that is leading to both opportunities and challenges for the power sector. So in Apricum's view, there are three major trends we have identified and that should be watched. The first one is that there's an impact on decreased storage costs coming from e-mobility. Most importantly, through economies of scale from gigafactories that drive down the lithium-ion battery cell costs. And this is both for electric vehicles, but also for stationary applications. But also through so-called second life batteries that are not suitable for electric vehicles anymore due to a degraded capacity, but these batteries could still be used for some stationary storage applications. And these batteries could be offered at very low prices and have the potential to further accelerate the downward trends for battery prices. And then as a second trend, we see vehicle to grid, which means that electric vehicles could feed electricity back into the grid if and when needed to provide grid services, for example, frequency control. And here, if regulatory barriers, which are largely in place at the moment, can be overcome and the economics can be improved, this could mean a potential competition for other flexibility options, including stationary storage. So this could be a competition down the road, but actually I expect a big enough market and no crowding out. And then the third trend, just to complete the picture, are battery buffered charging stations. So that means that you add a battery to an EV charging station, which can help to buffer the power required from the grid and thereby avoiding demand peaks and from that related grid constraints or costly charges. And this basically opens a new application for energy storage, which causes an increasing demand for stationary storage, while at the same time, obviously also enabling a further expansion of e-mobility.
What timelines are we looking at there? Is it already relevant right now? Are we talking about 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, a potential market in 15 years?
Well, that's always hard to say. I think economies of scale is obviously already happening right now. The drastic decrease in lithium-ion battery cell costs that we have witnessed over the last years was mainly driven by the emergence of more and more capacities for cell manufacturing driven by the e-mobility sector. I mentioned second life batteries. This is something that will become more relevant over the coming years as more and more second life batteries become available in the first place, because of course in their first life they are still used in cars. So let's say for about 7 years or something. And so you need a certain order of magnitude to also leverage economies of scale that allow for an economic conversion from first life batteries into second life batteries. Vehicle to grid, that depends a bit. I see that a little bit more down the road. There are pilots around the world, mostly pushed also by large car manufacturers. But here there are a lot of regulatory barriers still in place which have to be overcome. And seeing that the main use case of an electric vehicle is, or of a battery in an electric vehicle, is still to allow driving of that electric vehicle. I think using this battery for other things like competitive driving is still a second priority for car OEMs and also owners of electric vehicles, and therefore might become more of a topic a little bit further down the road. Battery buffer charging stations, with an increasing expansion of the charging infrastructure in the individual countries, this is also becoming already in reality, in particular when it comes to fast charging along highways. I know that these kind of batteries are already installed, and I see an increasing opportunity here for stationary storage.
All right, thanks. So you mentioned two other storage market drivers to check for the COVID-19 impact. One is competitiveness.
As I said, even if there is demand for more flexibility from renewable energy in electric vehicles, there might be still other non-storage solutions to provide the required flexibility. So that means energy storage has to be more competitive than these solutions, and this typically means cost competitiveness. So is there an impact of COVID-19 on the competitiveness of energy storage? In the short term, I would say yes, there might be price fluctuation caused by the disruption of the supply chains, in particular in the beginning of the year due to the Chinese lockdowns and the related factory closings. And also factories can largely manufacture again. There still might be temporary supply bottlenecks that could cause price spikes that impact competitiveness of storage in the short term. Because when battery manufacturing and battery purchasing slow down, there's a ripple effect throughout the supply chain. So all the battery materials and components like cathode separators and electrolyte facilities will slow down, reduce shifts and reduce working hours as the orders dry up. So even if deferred storage demand is released, the time it takes to restart the supply chain should not be underestimated. But again, more importantly, what is the longer term impact? And as mentioned before, the key reason for stationary storage cost decreases are economies of scale through the expansion of battery cell production, mainly for EVs. And battery cells, I mean, there's more than a battery cell in an energy storage system, but battery cells make up for 40 to 50% of the cost of an energy storage system. So if you are able to decrease cell costs, this has a large impact on systems cost. And there are vast expansions of cell manufacturing capacities planned in Europe alone. So last time I counted, there are 18 lithium-ion battery cell factories in the making. And this sums up to a capacity of about 240 gigawatt hours per year by 2024 earlier. And it's distributed all over Europe in locations like UK, France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. And this would then mean that also about 16% of the expected total global production of 1,550 gigawatt hours in 2024 will be based in Europe. And given these vast capacity buildups, battery cell costs are expected to continue following a similar downwards trajectory as we have already seen it with PV, but at a much bigger scale of manufacturing.
And when we talk about these factories, how much of that capacity is being used for mobile storage and how much is going into stationary storage? Is there like a competition between those two use cases?
Yeah, it certainly is. And we have seen that in the past when there were supply chain bottlenecks, that it could be hard for stationary storage companies to compete against the big orders from the large automotive OEMs. So overall, the stationary storage sector is having probably right now a share of around 6% on the total battery cell market. And this might increase a little bit, but it's likely to stay below 10% in the more distant future. I mean, you have to see, of course, that the overall market for battery cells is increasing drastically. So even 6% to 10% still means a decent size, but still the vast majority is covered by emobility and also consumer electronics. But actually consumer electronics, in that case, stationary storage is expected to overtake demand from this segment in the near future.
Let's close all the three prerequisites by talking about the third one. How are regulatory and market frameworks influenced by the pandemic?
Right. This is an important question, but even if energy storage is the most competitive solution to serve the need for flexibility, this does not help if there's no governmental buy-in to remove regulatory barriers for market access and to allow for monetizing the benefits energy storage can bring to the table. And I think this is very relevant because we have seen the biggest regulatory changes and the highest agility to introduce new market frameworks in countries that have a high sense of urgency or geographies that have a high sense of urgency. So for example, in the US, you have an ailing infrastructure, so you need to invest, or the UK, which is an island with not too many interconnectors to other countries. So in these geographies, there is a lot done by regulators to make life easier for energy storage, while, for example, in Central Europe, in Germany, Germany is in the middle of what we call the European copper plate. So there are interconnectors in all directions. So there are much more different options to provide flexibility. So energy storage is not seen as the key priority. But this is now changing because there's a huge chance for energy storage and clean tech in general emerging with the multiple economic stimulus projects that governments are establishing around the world and also in Europe to restart the post-pandemic economies. And this is a total spending in trillions. That's significant. And if only a fraction of those trillions would be earmarked for climate-friendly infrastructure, energy storage, which is a key enabler for more renewable energy, would definitely benefit big time.
So far, we have talked about the status quo and mainly the recovery mode in the COVID-19 crisis in regards to storage production, storage providers or investors. So on the long run, how will the market have changed on the long run, and what kind of mindset is important if you are in the storage industry?
To be successful in the post-pandemic world, we tell our clients that they should ask themselves, what are the mindset and behavioral shifts that are caused by the pandemic and that are likely to persist after the crisis. And of course, also what they should make up their mind, what do they need to do to have their business benefit from those trends. So examples could be, for example, related to the shock or the dimension of the global crisis, which is unprecedented to most of today's population. So this means there's a strong sensitivity for external shocks and an urge for resiliency, which should be emphasized. This resiliency aspect should be emphasized by adjusting the product, the value proposition, and the communications for energy storage, because energy storage is per se the great device to provide the required resiliency. And then other things, another example could be the digitalization that companies were forced to provide in order to keep their business running. So that could involve both the sales channels by, for example, residential storage system providers, but also the way how public consultations are done for large-scale grid projects, which were done virtually via TV and internet. And we would expect that all stakeholders will become more used to the convenient digital ways to interact with the storage companies and do not want to switch back to the old patterns entirely. And of course, we could also talk about supply chains here. I think the experience from the pandemic told us that you need to reassess the risks to global disruptions, be it a pandemic or just a trade war. And here I think it's important to switch from single or dual to really multiple supplier strategies and make sure that these companies have localized supply chains and overall do a good research in order to get the right partners on board. So overall, I think we can say that business model flexibility will be more important than ever, because the pandemic has shown that significant market disruptions can happen quick and unexpected. So industry players need to be able to react swiftly to deal with challenges and seize opportunities. So overall, what we are telling our clients is that those who succeed in identifying the post-pandemic trends early on and adjust the business model in a flexible way and accordingly to the trends, these are the companies that have a good chance to emerge from the crisis stronger than before.
So Florian, thanks a lot for all your insights. As we heard, 3 of the important drivers are looking very good for the energy storage sector. So that is demand on the one hand and competitiveness on the other hand. And the third important driver being regulations and framework is slowly improving depending on the region where you're at in the world. But it looks like most governments, most countries are changing their regulation for the benefit of energy storage. However, this is no reason to lean back. We heard that the most important thing is that you're very cautious, that you have a very adaptive mindset in your company, and that you establish an agile culture that allows you to quickly adapt to the next disruption of the market or the next crisis. So yes, work on your agility and work on being adaptive with your business model. Stay tuned for more episodes of the Smarter E podcast. By the way, if you want to dive deeper specifically into the topic of energy storage, check out thesmartere.com, go to the news and publications section, and you will find a lot of more expert interviews and background stories.